The information shared on CNS Unfiltered is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Always consult your healthcare provider before making any health or lifestyle changes. The views shared are those of guests and do not necessarily reflect those of Innate Clinical Nutrition or its affiliates. This episode includes affiliate links, which help support the show. Hello and welcome. I'm Jena Salisbury, and this is CNS Unfiltered, a show where clinical nutrition specialists uncover what traditional medicine overlooks. If you've been through the joys, the stresses of becoming a new parent, or if you're even considering that maybe you want to become a parent, then you are intimately aware of how important nutrition is for fertility. It's a given, right? You're literally growing another person inside of you. Of course, what you're eating is going to be a huge factor in that baby's development. In addition to a factor in your own health across your fertility journey. But sometimes it's not always clear from the jump that nutrition can be the solution to some of the difficulties and health problems that arise during this incredible time. And a lot of the time, traditional medicine isn't a place to get that information. During my first pregnancy, I struggled to get my iron up, and it took a serious toll on my body. I had been a vegetarian, borderline raw vegan for 8 years prior to getting pregnant. And as my body moved through this new stage, my iron levels were far too low. I had incredible acid reflux. I was constipated. I had hemorrhoids. I had taken 3-hour naps, all the things. It was a wonderful time, truly. But it was also just as hard on my body. The answer from traditional medicine was iron pills and Tums. And at 8 months, I just could not stomach them anymore. I was nauseous all the time and finally just had enough. When I switched from an obstetrician to a home birth, my midwife showed me the light at the end of the tunnel. I didn't need iron pills or Tums. Through traditional medicine, my midwife showed me how to get my iron levels up naturally. I can infuse it in my water with a lucky iron fish. I can cook my vegetables with lemon and get that vitamin C instead of Tums. I could drink different teas to get my bowels moving. And once that happened, I didn't have to worry about the acid reflux. My midwife showed me how to trust and support my body and its innate wisdom instead of having to fight it all of the time. And yeah, I had gone through RD classes. I had graduated. And in those times of stress, it's easy to default, right? It's easy to give our power away and do what we're told by the experts. I'm glad I changed my expert to someone who looks at the body more holistically, more functionally, like my midwife. I am so grateful to my midwife for being one of the people to open the door for me into functional medicine and the incredible things that it has the power to change for our health. As a CNS, my passion is always to show people that optimizing our health can come from a place of trust. It doesn't have to be a fight. Aida Sadeghi, fellow CNS and owner of Feel Good Eats Nutrition in Portland, Oregon, shares that passion as well. And that's who we're talking to today. In this episode, we'll discuss her own personal journey into functional medicine. And then we'll discuss what issues she focused on with clients coming in at different stages in their own fertility journeys. If you're on the road yourself or think you might be someday, this episode is for you. Hello, welcome back to CNS Unfiltered. We are here today with Aida, and I am so excited to have you here today. Welcome to CNS Unfiltered. I know there's CNSs and other healthcare practitioners that are really excited to learn about nutrition and practices and how we function as a CNS. Where do we fit in? So Ida comes from us focusing more on hormones and endocrine systems. So I'm going to turn it over to her so she can enlighten us, tell us about her experiences, what brought her to be in CNS, what that experience has looked like.
Yeah, I mean, the we call it a journey, most of us. The journey to becoming a CNS has its ups and downs, and it feels like in the beginning it's a little bit more of the downs before we hit the ups. My undergraduate degree was, a completely different route. I got my undergrad degree in economics, and it was not the ideal time to graduate as a 21-year-old with a degree in economics in 2008.
Oh,
So we know what happened there. And so it was just kind of like, well, I was looking for a job, any job that I could get. I had my annual exam with my doctor. I pop into his office and, he's known me since I was a young kid. And we got to talking and I explained that I just graduated and he was looking for somebody. So I started working at my doctor's office and, just kind of front desk stuff, scheduling, answering the phones. But kind of as I got more and more immersed, I learned more about health and really it felt like I saw a little bit of a preview of what could potentially happen with my own body and health if I didn't take care of myself and really also started to kind of recognize some of the shortcomings of the healthcare system and just the restrictions and the timing and all the requirements that doctors face and the challenges there and really the inability to provide proper preventive medicine. And so as I learned more about that, I became more interested, especially in the nutrition side of it, because that is really one of the big factors that we can control. We can't control our genetics as much as we would love to, and I would love to. So that kind of led me to, okay, getting back to school, doing all my prerequisite work, getting my master's degree. And then kind of in that process of getting my prerequisite work, I was looking at, what are the options to becoming a nutritionist? And RD is kind of the long established path that you can go down. But then I started seeing different certifications like a CNS and a CCN. And I started looking into, well, what are those? Because RD just kind of makes me think of like a hospital setting, or at least it did at the time. And it wasn't something that sounded very appealing to me, especially coming from, a primary care office is not necessarily the most acute setting, but you do see a lot of just kind of challenging and almost heartbreaking situations. And so I didn't feel like the RD was the right fit for me. So essentially looking into it more and more, I decided on like, all right, the CNS seems pretty robust and decided to follow that path. Got my master's degree, which was actually a really great experience. I was never very into academics and going back to school was something I dreaded, but it actually ended up being a really enjoyable experience. I didn't want it to end, to be honest. And so my particular program, there were a few courses that were missing. So after obtaining my degree, I still had to take some additional prerequisite courses for the CNS specifically. And I was able to just find those at my local community college, which was also more budget friendly and always a fan of that. Since I was still working at that primary care office, I was able to just, at that point, I was doing a lot of more kind of like patient education and patient care and calling on lab results and telling them what they need to do and next steps. So essentially a lot of health education and coaching. And so that was a big part of how I obtained my hours for my kind of clinical experience and practice. And after all that was completed and I had the official letters behind my name, I thought about, all right, well, let's figure out what the next steps are. So just like any other person would do, I took to Indeed and Monster and started looking for jobs. And all I kept seeing was RD, 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 RD requirement. And so I tried applying to some of those, but it just never, either the application probably didn't make it through in the first place at all, or it was a, well, thanks, but no thanks response. So that was very frustrating. And kind of that's when really the understanding grew of like, oh, well, people don't really know or understand what a CNS is. And this is going to be a bit of a rocky start. So I figured at the time I was living in California and it's what we call a green state. So there's no restrictions on practice or scope. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to start my own practice, my own office and see clients on my own and see how that goes. By that time, we hit the end of 2019, and then the beginning of 2020 rolled around. And I did have a physical office that I was going to and working with clients at that time. So all that had to be put on pause due to the quarantine and pandemic situation. And then, just my focus shifted. Personal life kind of took the front seat in that time period. I met somebody and we ended up moving out of state a year later. And so it was just a lot of delays and starting over almost. But essentially after we settled in here in Portland, Oregon, I got back to, start picking up my practice and starting it back up and looking at what it takes to really get it going. For me personally, I always in my mind had the idea of following the path of an insurance-based practice just because, I understand that health is a really challenging area, and then the finances on top of that can just add another layer of stress, and really wanting to make it accessible for people to be able to work with somebody on their nutrition and health. And so that was a bit of a journey as well, but I was able to get through and get some licensing and then follow the process to obtain my contracts with insurance. And that, let's see, I think it's been about 3 years now. Yeah, so just a little over 3 years now that I've got a fully insurance-based practice going. And it's great. I will say, I think probably about 90% of my clientele is able to see me with their insurance. And so I think that really is just a beneficial thing for both parties. I don't have to go through the whole process of marketing and doing the essentially sales process. The clients are able just to not have to worry about the finances, utilize their insurance that they're already paying an arm and a leg for most of the time, and then get the care that, they want and need.
Beautiful. That is awesome. And it's very, in my experience so far, and I've connected with a lot of CNSs, I have yet to have one until now that says they run off of a fully insurance-based practice. That is awesome. What do you think was the pivotal points in your career? Any like highlights or tips or tricks that you would like to give any future CNSs or CNSs right now that are coming out of school being like, wait, what do I do? Anything for them?
Right. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if somebody is really interested in following the CNS path, I really would say it depends on where you're located. So, here on the West Coast, it is a little bit of a Wild West, as they say, because we don't have a whole lot of licensure pathways or restrictions for that, which opens a door in some ways, but there's not a lot of structural support in terms of like licensing and legislative support. So I know there are some states that are much better in that regard, like Maryland and North Carolina and Florida and Illinois and Pennsylvania. So there are some areas where the CNS pathway is just as viable and sustainable as an RD pathway because of the licensure. So if your end goal is to enter the world of insurance and have that be the way that you operate your practice, I think location matters, and then understanding what those laws and legislations allow you to do and maybe don't allow you to do is really important. And then I think the other thing that was really helpful for me is just, and that I think partially comes with time too, but really figuring out like what is it about nutrition that I'm really passionate or excited or interested about or in. I started out, like I said, I started out in a primary care office doing a lot of education and coaching, and it was the kind of really standard things you see in the world of nutrition, which is people want to lose weight, metabolic conditions, blood sugar, diabetes, prediabetes, cholesterol, hypertension, whatever that may be. And in the primary care setting that I happened to be, it also tended to be an older population. So there wasn't a lot of connection. It was something that ended up getting a little repetitive and boring, to be honest. And so figuring out what aspect of nutrition and health you're really interested in and passionate about is going to make you more excited to continue with the work too.
Definitely. Beautiful. And so your practice now in Oregon, do you have a niche clientele? Like, what is your passion when it comes to nutrition?
Yeah, my focus really, I think, is I'm honing it down more and more. It was kind of more of the broader, like women's health, and then whatever's encompassed in that, whether it be metabolic support, weight loss, although I will say that's not my favorite thing to focus and work on. Um, you know, supporting thyroid, lifestyle, hormones, whether it's PCOS or endometriosis or perimenopause or fertility, pregnancy, the realm of pregnancy, but I've kind of narrowed that down. I'm really interested in the fertility aspect of nutrition. So kind of that preconception, prenatal, pregnancy, and then postpartum, I think is really where I'm narrowing my focus in on. And I think it's great. I think it's just something that I have an interest in, on a personal level, something that I'm working on. And also, I think it's an area that we don't really understand quite yet in terms of the value that it can provide to, supporting our efforts in conceiving and creating a viable pregnancy, or even supporting or complementing things like IVF and artificial reproductive technologies to make them more efficient and effective in achieving a pregnancy that we want.
Beautiful. Oh, that's so exciting and definitely a beautiful niche. We're going to kind of switch gears and I'm super excited to hear about your clientele. So you can get us started. What is the highlight, right? What did they come to you? Where did traditional medicine stop with their help with care? Where did you pick up? What testing did you need to get for the next steps?
Right. So, being an insurance-based practice, I do get a mix of clientele coming my way, but it tends to be more so women and females that come to me. And a lot of times it is women that are struggling with things like PCOS, or they're kind of in the active trying stage for, we refer that as TTC, trying to conceive, or they may have experienced a miscarriage or a couple miscarriages, or they're kind of in that stage before they want to dive into IVF. So that tends to be the people that maybe gravitate towards me. And in those cases, oftentimes it's, well, I was on birth control for 5, 10, 15 years, and we've been trying for a few months, we've been trying for a year, and it's not happening. Or, we've been working at trying for a pregnancy and might have had a miscarriage there or two in between. So that tends to be the challenge. And a lot of times those women have gone through courses of, medications. They've maybe been put on something like Clomid, or they've had some kind of basic hormone testing and told everything is fine and just keep trying. They might have been told to take a prenatal, and then usually that's kind of where that lifestyle and nutrition education begins and ends, and they feel at a loss. I think a lot of times they realize that nutrition and lifestyle is important to this process, but they don't really know where to start. And so that's where I come in. For me, the focus really is, I try to be as comprehensive as I can be. I like to approach it. And I always say our focus is probably 80-90% food, because that's what's within my scope and that's what we're trained in. But I do always like to talk about sleep and stress and movement and some of those lifestyle factors that affect us, because the body and the mind, the body and the mental health are not two separate things. They are interconnected. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Makes it a little challenging because sometimes it feels like I'm teetering on the edge of being a therapist, and that's not within our scope. But, we do what we can within the realm that we're allowed to. And so food is the primary focus, and figuring out what kind of routine and what kind of options will suit the client. And it's a little different for each person because there's no standard protocol. And I think a big part of what's important for me is, yes, we want to understand the research and we want to understand what those recommendations are. But at the end of the day, if I can make all the best evidence-based recommendations that there are and that we know about, but if it's not something that the client can incorporate into their day-to-day and lifestyle, we're back at square one. It's not going to help anybody. So kind of figuring out how can we bring in the best elements of the research that we have and fit them into what this client's life and day-to-day and routine and demands look like, and blend the two.
Perfect.
So that's kind of the nutrition side of it. But, from a clinical standpoint, when they come to me, oftentimes there's a lot of questions about, what labs have you done? What testing have you done? Do if you've had an ultrasound? Have you been diagnosed? I mean, I have a lot of women coming to me and they're complaining of all the classic symptoms of what we would associate with PCOS, and yet they have never had even their testosterone checked. And so, that's a big part of what my day-to-day looks like is almost like client education and giving them the tools to advocate for themselves with their provider. So helping them understand like what they should ask for, what they can ask for, because it's their body. And I feel like, you have to be your own advocate and you deserve to know what's going on. And we have that middleman of the nurse practitioner or doctor who needs to order these tests for them. And so I will often ask, like, hey, go back to your provider, ask them for labs for X, Y, and Z. And I prefer doing it that way. I can point them to resources where they can either order it themselves, or we do have the option of ordering functional testing. But I also always have to keep in mind the financial burden that comes with that, right? So if I have somebody that is on the brink of thinking about jumping into something like IVF, that's going to be a very heavy financial investment and commitment that they're making. And so sometimes the recommendation for something like functional testing, in my mind, may just not be quite justified to add that additional financial burden on them. So I will often ask them to go back to your provider, ask for XYZ. Usually it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tests. And that way we can get the insurance coverage as well to work for them. They get a more detailed uh, overview of what's going on underneath the hood. And then we have a better idea of how we can support them nutritionally or with the lifestyle recommendations or with the supplement recommendations. So then it is something that is very personalized for that particular individual.
Could you maybe list some labs? I know that we don't have a specific client that we are talking through, but what are some of the most common labs that you feel traditional medicine doesn't run, that when someone comes to you, you're like, okay, these are usually my top 4 that I'm going to be asking for?
Right. I mean, if I'm thinking like specifically in the realm of fertility and kind of prenatal prep, a detailed thyroid panel. I mean, man, I don't know how many times I've seen somebody just order TSH and say, you're fine. And they don't check any of the other markers that are associated with our thyroid function, like your free T4, free T3, TPO antibodies, thyroglobulin antibodies. I actually just had this. What day is it? I think it was on Monday or maybe it was last week. My days get blurred, but I think it was just about a week ago. I had a lady that we've been working together for a few months. She was newly diagnosed with hypothyroidism, put on levothyroxine. And based on her symptoms and the experience that she was sharing, I'm like, they only gave you the medication based on a TSH level, but I don't see a T4, T3, any of the other markers. Go back to your doctor and ask them for it. She did. And the doctor raised an eyebrow. It's like, well, why is your nutritionist saying you should get these labs done? And she insisted labs were done, Hashimoto's. And so now she's been referred to her endocrinologist, who's going to hopefully do a little bit further evaluations and then manage her treatment appropriately, hopefully. So, you know, again, coming from the world of primary care, I know and I understand the limits that a lot of physicians face, and it's just the time. The time is not there. So to answer your question, a lot of the labs that I will typically request is a detailed thyroid panel with the TSH, free T4, free T3, TPO antibodies, thyroglobulin antibodies. And then from the hormone aspect or standpoint, the lot, LH, FSH, estradiol, progesterone, DHEAS, total and free testosterone. I feel like I'm missing something. Insulin, although not a sex hormone, but a hormone. And then always vitamin D. And I know a big part of why physicians don't order it is because insurance coverage changed with that a few years ago. So that's something I always will explain to the patient as well. But vitamin D, especially in the realm of fertility, very important. So we want to know what those levels are. And because we don't have, very good food sources for boosting up our vitamin D, then supplementation really becomes the most effective way to do that. And we want to supplement appropriately. In order to do so, we need to know what those levels are. And then depending on their situation and what their cycles look like, oftentimes I'll ask for an iron panel as well. So looking at ferritin, iron, TIBC, so we get an understanding of what their status is, especially pre-pregnancy, because if they're low, this is the best time to boost their iron levels. Once they become pregnant, then there's just so much going on in the body. It becomes challenging. And then not to mention all the, lovely effects of first trimester, adding high dose iron supplementation just makes that part even more challenging. So we try to do as much as we can ahead of time, especially in women that come to me that are already conscious and mindful of that planning process.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And I'm going to recommend all those too. Someone's coming in, they haven't had those panels, especially when it's coming into fertility. For those who may not understand the connection of thyroid and how that impacts the ability to get pregnant, can you maybe just touch on that for a moment? Because I do think that is one of the beauties of being a CNS is that we are taught cascades. We are taught the interconnection of the body. And so, yeah, I'm working on gut, but I'm going to be looking at your thyroid, or I'm checking out your brain. And they're like, why?
Right.
So can you kind of just marry that together of why it's important to look at the thyroid if you're trying to manage hormones or get pregnant?
I will say I'm not a thyroid expert by any means, but I would always call the thyroid as like the hormone command center. Like everything has a connection to one another, and all the parts like the reproductive system and the endocrine system and the gastrointestinal system, it's all part of one vessel. So there is definitely a strong connection. We know that with thyroid function, that can certainly affect ovarian development and then also cyclical regularity, which if you're trying to become pregnant, it's very important to have regular and ovulatory cycles. Otherwise, it's not happening. So that's kind of the just really macroscopic view of that. Yeah, and looking at those levels now, depending on what the results come back with, if everything is normal, great, that's best case scenario. That gives us less things to have to, quote unquote, worry about. But if there are things that need to be addressed in the realm of thyroid, then if necessary, we can look at doing a referral to an endocrinologist so then they can be managed and treated properly, especially before pregnancy. And then from a dietary standpoint, then we can make some of those adjustments, right? Like if it is somebody where now all of a sudden we know that there's a autoimmune condition like Hashimoto's involved, then we make the necessary dietary changes that are appropriate for that condition, but still keep in mind the nutritional requirements and demands to be nutritionally bulked up and ready to conceive.
What do you think is the main pivot point for clients that come to you?
Gosh, I think a lot of it ends up coming down to taking the time and space to invest in yourself, right? So like making sure that I think for me that it's always from a lifestyle standpoint, sleep is the most important thing, something that I personally have struggled with for many, many years and continue to struggle with. But so really focusing on the things that fill our cup, making sure we have good sleep quality, because that's going to affect our cortisol levels and our blood sugar metabolism and the energy we have to then be able to move and engage in some kind of physical activity, and really driving in that understanding that you got to make time for yourself. You got to prioritize yourself. And, for most people, when they're at the stage where they are planning for a family and to become pregnant, it's important enough to where they understand and realize that that investment is worth it. So focusing on spending some time in the kitchen, spending more time in the bedroom and sleeping, hopefully, in that, spending some time moving, and movement, it doesn't have to be anything crazy or, like American Ninja style. It's just move in ways that feel good to you. And it can be fun. You want to dance, you can bike, you can hike, you can garden, you can there's so many different ways of moving. And so just kind of figuring out what it is that they enjoy and how we can make that an important part of their day or week and then incorporating that.
I love that. And I feel like that really highlights where traditional medicine also falls short, right? They're like, oh, it's just your stress. Take care of your stress. But there's no underlying. Is the stress coming from inside? Is it coming from outside? Is it coming from food? Like, why? Right. And that's something that I think we
Yeah.
address. It's the first thing we ask, right? Why? Why are we not? And where do we have to go? And then why? So I think that is beautiful because as a CNS, that is one of our main tools in our toolbox is meeting the client where it's at, being super precise or using precision nutrition and precision lifestyle medicine to give them tangible pieces they get to use long term and see. And it's free ish. Right? Like to sleep or to walk or to do any of these things where most of the time traditional medicine they're taught, here's a pill and go work on it. And that is, I feel, what fails a lot of our clients is we're not blanketed. We are the same, not the same.
Yeah. And I think too, speaking to like, oh, here's a pill. There's so many times where I have somebody come to me from other providers and they're like, oh, well, I have all these supplements and it's supposed to help me like manage my stress and my cortisol and it's supposed to da 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 da. I'm like, well, but you're not sleeping and you're not moving and you have 5 coffees a day and you don't really eat food. So why don't we focus on the food and then we don't need as many pills? So, even with supplements, I feel like I tend to be more on the conservative side in comparison to maybe some colleagues or even other providers. And it's just, I feel like the more we can take it back to like the real thing, the source, the food, like figuring out the stress and decompressing and filling our cup, that tends to be something that's more maintainable and sustainable too. I mean, yeah, you can go through a course of supplements for 6 months, a year, 2 years or whatever, but eventually you're going to get burnt out on that stuff. And so my brain always goes to like, what's going to be the thing that has, you know, long-term sustainability.
Yeah.
And we're going to need to eat every single day for the rest of our lives. Like we can't stop that. So
That's awesome. That is beautiful. And thank you for that approach. Because, yeah, I see that too. They come in with a binder full of testing and a bag full of supplements. And we're like, wait a second. Supplements are a supplement, right? They should supplement while we're correcting the gut health or while we're trying to figure out how to get iron in their body or how we're trying to do something. But it's not the solution. It is just a placeholder or to get us out of deficiency or it's there to do a job. I don't think many of our clients, right? Just someone not in healthcare, I don't think they realize that the supplements are still trying to change biochemistry. They're still working within our biochemistry. They're not just, oh, it's a supplement, it's safe, it's not going to do anything. Well, if it wasn't going to do anything, then we shouldn't be expecting a result with a biochemical change, that they're still very powerful and to be used. There's a method to the madness to be used with a
yeah,
purpose for a certain
and it
amount of
really does feel
time.
like madness.
It is, yeah. Well,
Right.
thank you. What would you say, or would you say that there's a myth around fertility or pregnancy that you would like to debunk? So that from people that traditional more to a functional medicine mindset.
I feel like, yeah, like you said, there's a method to the madness. I think the myth is like, oh, just keep trying. Just, depending on their age, give it 12 months, give it 6 months. And I mean, if you keep trying the same thing and you're not getting the result you want, then that means something has to change. And so I take it back to like, let's look at what we're doing. What does our day to day look like? Where is our consistency? And it's maybe not really a myth, but there's no substitute for a well-rounded, healthy lifestyle. And it's hard. It's a simple concept, but it doesn't mean that it's easy to implement. And so just building up that persistency or persistence is going to be helpful in getting ourselves to a place where we're nutritionally optimized, and then that makes the end goal more attainable. And I will say too, it's funny, I actually had a gal yesterday. They're actively trying as of last week. And we had a conversation about what her needs look like and what she should be doing and keeping in mind. And then she asked, well, so what should my partner be doing? Whatever you're doing, he's doing too. Unless you're a unicorn and you can make a baby by yourself, whoever that counterpart is needs to be mirroring what you're doing. So um, I think we forget too, and maybe that's a little bit of a myth in the realm of fertility, is that it's all the responsibility and the not necessarily burden, but yeah, the responsibility of the woman. And that's not true because it takes two to tango, as they say. And we know from the statistics and the research that we have that male factor plays a big part in fertility challenges and even implantation challenges and challenges in early trimester pregnancies and so forth. So it's a very important factor to keep in mind, is because you can't make a baby by yourself. You need two, and the other 50% of that is just as important.
Awesome. Awesome. And perfect. The parts that are overlooked, right? That's what we uncover. We get that time. So for anyone listening or a future CNS who's like, oh, I really want to maybe learn from you, or a client that's like, yes, that's my fit. That's who I need. How could they reach out to you? Do you telework? Kind of give us some insight on how somebody could work with you.
Sure, yeah. I'm licensed in a couple states, so like West Coast is a go, and then depending on licensure law, so there's a couple states where I don't set my foot into, like Florida, for example, or North Carolina right now, although I don't know, maybe that'll change in the future. But I do provide telehealth. I have a practice here in Portland and it's virtual, so majority of my clients are from Oregon, Portland, or California even. And then I have some speckled around in other states. The best way to find me is through my website, which is just feelgoodeatsnutrition.com. It's very long, but if you Google it, you'll find it. I do have an Instagram account, but I will say I hit a bit of a lull with that, and or a wall really, and I haven't really utilized my social media in quite a while. So really my website is the best way to get a hold of me. There's a contact form. I think my email might be on there as well. And then, we can kind of figure out what next steps are from there.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ida. Thank you again, Ida, for your commitment to helping women trust their body's potential and incredible wisdom through functional medicine. Your body has a method to the madness. With nutrition, you can trust and support your body through any journey, especially before, during, and after pregnancy. It doesn't have to be a fight. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in today for this episode of CNS Unfiltered. For any listeners in Oregon or California, check out feelgoodeatsnutrition.com. If you're not in Oregon or California, if you're exploring fertility and pregnancy and looking to optimize your health and nutrition, a CNS could be your partner through it. Once again, I'm Jena Salisbury, and remember to listen to your gut.